I had a discussion with a colleague yesterday where there was a common phrase that you hear very often, just to be sure. So the risk management, the critical thinking test, nothing can happen, but just to be sure we still do it.
Yeah. Welcome.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome to the Making It in Manufacturing podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time today. I know you've got a very busy few days and you had a busy weekend at the ISPE conference. How has been the weekend and also today?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much for having me here. And I think it was really an intense weekend, with all the emerging leaders and young professionals, coaching them throughout the 2 days and having all the interactions. But it was really great to learn new perspectives, even myself, right, with so many years in the industry, learning always new things. So it was really great.
Yeah. And before I think we dive into your background and everything, touching on the ISPE, what was the weekend about in terms of the hackathon?
Right. It was a hackathon. So it's something that is a little bit like, you normally would see this in the computer science industry, where you give young professionals kind of a problem statement, and throughout one weekend or technically 24 hours, they have to develop a solution for that. Yeah. And ISPE adopted that for their emerging leader chapters, so that a large pharmaceutical company provides a problem statement about a real life problem in pharmaceuticals. For example, it can be in manufacturing, R&D, or a general topic, and then the students and young professionals have 2 days to identify a potential solution, then present this to a committee of judges, and then one of the groups will win. And then they will get the chance to present on the ISPE conference that is currently happening.
I might see them then over the next day or two presenting their
Exactly.
topics. Yeah, no,
correct.
Brilliant. Cool. So in terms of, we'll start with maybe a little bit of an introduction just to you, who you are, what you do currently in your current role, and then before we dive into your general career.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so my name is Carsten Jasper. I'm originating out of Germany, working for Charles River for almost 17 years now. And in my current role, I'm working at the intersection kind of between quality, operations, and operational excellence in the R&D group. So focusing on compliance in a really lean manner for a lot of our products.
Yeah, perfect, great. And I always start sort of the first proper question before I get into it is 3 fun facts about yourself. It doesn't have to be 3, but have you got any fun facts before we dive into?
Yeah, fun fact 1 is I'm shy, so whenever I have to present, it's almost a nightmare for me.
You're doing well so far, so I was just to...
I think the second one is I love beer, right? So many people would not expect that. And the third one is I hear metal music, and whenever people hear that I hear dark metal, medieval, they say, what? And so I think these are 3 of these fun facts.
Yeah, it's 2 questions off the back of that. What is your favorite beer? I'm assuming it would be a German beer, potentially.
No, it is not. Actually, my favorite beer is a Trappist beer from the monastery in West-Vleteren in Belgium.
Okay, so a Belgian beer.
Yeah, very strong, you know.
Yeah. Can't have too many of them.
Yeah, correct. No, always one in up front of a presentation, so that helps a lot.
No, I think I'm very much into my Spanish, more lagers at the moment rather than I'm not a big API or ale type drinker. No, nice. So, in terms of, you've already highlighted 17 years at Charles River is not that common, I would say, in our industry. I think the average tenure for people these days is sort of around 3 years before they move on to new roles. Very impressive. From starting off in compliance through to sort of senior director, you've had many roles across the business. What is your favourite position that you've had? And why?
Yeah, I think my favorite position was in operational excellence, to be honest, because at that time, every day was different. So It was not about a specific topic, right? Because operational excellence can be everything, and you were always challenged to learn something new.
Yeah.
On day one, you could have a project in operational manufacturing, and the next day you could have something in IT, right? It was always process driven, so you had some kind of a common theme, but it was always very special, and it was challenging, and that was, I think, one of the most interesting things with it.
Yeah. And is the, I suppose, OPEX in general, would it be what it is in terms of the improvement element of it? Why was it that, is it the challenge in terms of how can I improve this over time and creating something to improve the wider business?
Yeah.
Is that what
yeah,
really,
this is one part of it, right? This is one part of it to really improve things, but also, as said, it's something that you not necessarily be used to, right? Because the problems you were assigned might be completely outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
So you have to get up to speed, you have to learn, you have to understand, you have to do a deep dive into the processes, and that brings a new challenge every single day.
Yeah.
And so that was really the most important piece with it.
Yeah. No, nice. And obviously 17 years in a business is the fact you've had many different, 5 or 6, maybe 8 different roles, I think, within that. So what was it, or how have you managed to stay with a business and evolve and develop in different departments? What have you done personally, and maybe potentially what Charles River has actually offered you?
Yeah. I think it's 2 things. One was that Charles River is a company that is very broad in the sense of what they offer, right? Yeah. They have the different business units, they have the different sites, they have different business lines. That helps a lot, because whenever I moved the role, it was like being a new company when you switch from business unit A to B. And I think the second piece is that it always was that it was not that important what you know on paper. It was what you actually did during your day job, right? So I always was very lucky to have managers who were very open and were able to say, okay, just try it, right? Yeah, if you fail, then we will see, but just try it. And that really helped me to move along. And then we had these opportunities, and then throughout the years I grew into more senior roles, and it was always really that the manager said, just try it. Yeah,
I think it is something special. I think one of my old bosses in London actually said, when you find that company, you should never need to leave to find the position that you want. And I think that's a testament to what you've actually had the opportunity to do. So yeah, a great advertisement for Charles River, I suppose, for anyone listening to be attracted to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. It's they are not looking at the paper. They're looking at if you're really providing a solution, and if you're willing to provide solutions and do that will definitely help you to come along.
No, definitely. And I think you touched on it there in terms of the specific managers being key in terms of pushing you to have that opportunity. How important was that leadership throughout your journey to give you the opportunity and to maybe push and develop you? What was that like in terms of?
I think it was really very important, right? Because without a manager taking the risk, I mean, for them it's also a risk, right? When they expose you to a specific problem, for example, especially for operational excellence, it was my boss at that time that said, you know what, I think you're a good candidate for that. You have never done that before, and it doesn't matter. Just try it, and we will see where it goes. And I think that is really one of the most important things. They put the trust in me. They encouraged me to put myself to the edge. And then I also had very good mentorship from at least 2 to 3 managers, which also helped a lot, right?
Yeah, and I suppose today, in terms of your leadership style and in terms of how you maybe conduct yourself as a leader, was them early phases of them people, did that really help shape maybe your perspective and how you do things now?
Definitely. I at least have at least one manager who really helped me shape myself, and who was really a role model in how leadership should look like. As I said, it was this kind of attitude to say, we just tried, right? And failures can happen, and really putting this confidence in oneself, and then mentoring and providing guidance while not managing you like left, right, but really letting you develop, but at the same time always be there when necessary. And having this kind of feeling when it is necessary to be there.
Yeah, I think it is massively important to give someone a rope to be able to try and to give it a go themselves and learn from that side. But when there's problems, you're there to sort of help. I think it's massively key for leadership and developing people. I think
absolutely,
it's crucial.
Absolutely.
And I think you've highlighted, we've mentioned 17 years, etc., within the business. How, in terms of, we've spoke previously about validation and CSV in terms of your experience. How has that evolved over the past sort of 17 years from what you've seen? Probably maybe more CSV rather than validation. Validation principles will be the same, but CSV I think will have maybe changed a lot.
Yeah, it has definitely changed. I mean, CSV always was part of my role, right? Either more or less, even though maybe the title wasn't given that, but it was always a part of that because there were also always computer systems involved. And what I've seen over time is two things. One is the shift from we have to validate every single button in a software, more towards a risk-based approach on really focusing on the critical piece. That happened in the industry with the GAM5 second edition, with things like critical thinking, computer software assurance. And I think this was also part of that journey as well in the last 15 years or so, that the agencies more and more develop towards this risk-based approach as well. I mean, think about the computer software assurance approach by FDA. EMA with the new Annex 11 will incorporate much more risk management. So the good thing with that is you can focus on the really critical parts. I think a downside is that you're always at risk of, do I really push all the buttons that the regulators would expect?
I think that's maybe one of the key things because it's left up to a bit of a judgment of your approach and strategy.
Correct.
How do you know what is too much or too little? I mean, you only ever find out when you're being inspected.
Exactly.
Which is often
but
too late.
It comes down to really the risk management, right? And it puts, of course, a completely set of requirements on the knowledge of people in CSV that are doing the computer system validation. Because as said in the past, it was more like identifying the requirements. Okay, I have to push this button. This is a process. And now out of the sun, they also have to analyze the risk. And risk management is different to identifying requirements and doing testing.
So what have you done differently over the past, say, 5 years or so to incorporate this mindset? It's a mindset shift. Massively, I think, within a business with risk management. So is there anything specifically you've done?
For me personally, I think it was really, as you said, this mindset shift, right? So to not do it after a common scheme of starting the software, going through every single function, verifying that it's providing what you would expect, more towards starting with, okay, look at the process, right? Before you even touch the computerized system, look at the process. What are the key risks of the process? And then translate this into your computer system, and where are key risks of your computerized system that is supporting your process, right? And where do I really need to put the focus? I think validations have become more lean by that, significantly more lean, but at the same time, it also puts a lot of more upfront thinking and planning. Because when your risk management is wrong, or when you identify the wrong risks, you put the whole system up for failure.
And how do you, because it's a mindset shift, it means everybody has to be aligned with that shift. So what are some of the challenges that you've seen or you've overcome over these 5 years, for example, around bringing people together in the right? Is it a hard thing that's still ongoing?
It's still a hard thing that is ongoing. I can tell you, it's also a scheme that we see, for example, on the conference, right? So risk management, critical thinking is becoming more and more important. With all these new AI stuff coming up, it's becoming even more important. And it's still that you see that you have discussions with people who are a little bit more risk adverse, saying, but we cannot do it. We cannot take this risk. We have to reduce the risk level. And it's even if there is no risk, right? I had a discussion with a colleague yesterday where there was a common phrase that you hear very often, just to be sure.
Just to be sure.
So the risk management, the critical thinking tasks, nothing can happen. But just to be sure, we still do it. So it's really an ongoing journey. And I think we will see a lot of additional years going down the road until this mindset shift really ends up in everybody's head.
Yeah. To be able to, I think you mentioned that the ISP this next few days. I know from looking at a lot of the speakers and topics that are up, it very much is around that, the approaches for that, which is a good shift. And I think they're obviously having a big impact on GAMP guidelines in terms of putting them in place and improving them for the second edition. So I think one of the topics as well I wanted to sort of move into from the CSV was around data integrity. And I think with obviously Charles River in terms of the laboratories and your role you've had with sort of CQV and the process in place, a lot of common things I see from businesses is that get flagged by inspectors and auditors is around data integrity in labs, which I know is heavily linked with sort of your CSV approach. Is there any common things that you're seeing or hearing at the moment that are continually keep getting flagged that businesses need to catch up with and improve on?
Yeah, I definitely think so. So one thing that you see very often is still, even though the ARTO principles are in the industry since 25 years now, you still find systems where the username is administrator. Right? So attributability is not given, and they use admin accounts to log in. That's really something that you see very often. Look at the 483s and you will find that risk very, very often. Then another thing is that you have systems creating flat files where the flat file is open to everyone. Right, so literally auditors go in and there is a real good 483. I'm not going to disclose the company, but you can just read it, where literally the auditor went into the lab and asked the technician to open up a file, change some values, save the file, and then print it.
And that's the whole.
And that was possible for the lab technician.
Yeah, it's crazy.
No audit trail, nothing, right?
It's crazy to think that is possible within the and I've heard similar stories in terms of along production of technicians having access to lines, etc. It's crazy. I mean, how do you overcome that in terms of for anyone listening, in terms of a business that has that currently in their procedure? What do you do and how do you fix it?
It's two things. So one is what we still see is, and a colleague of mine gave me some very interesting examples on that, is that our software developers, especially for software used in these compliance areas, they have to improve. Okay. I mean, it should be impossible after 25 years that our Core++ is around that you're still able to modify flat file data, right? That is one thing. And the other is, I think, it's around education to on a risk-based approach, analyze this. So risk-based approach does not only mean I analyze a standard risk for every software, but my colleague and myself, over the years, we identified typical areas where you will find risks. And we have kind of a checklist that we check each software against, and then also developed solutions. So for example, in my talk that I'm going to give in tomorrow, I'll show a typical example of how you can overcome these data integrity challenges. There is a lot of additional software available in the market that you can use to protect your systems.
Which I think new technologies, softwares and things, is AI going to have a big impact, do you think, in that area or in general? What's your take on?
I absolutely think so. I mean, when you just think about data integrity, for example, right? And then remember this interesting flaw from Microsoft Copilot, where access was not handled the right way. So where anyone was able to access critical data, right? So they just had to enter something into Copilot, and then Copilot basically gave them sensitive data, HR data. So it's making things even more complicated, because AI does need to have access to all the data on one hand, but you have to manage the access, right? Who's prompting, and then your AI can provide the data, but you need to have the metadata available. Who does have access to this data, right? So it's I think AI is going to significantly increase the complexity around managing integrity of data.
Which is probably not what people need to hear when they're already struggling with certain aspects, I think, of it in the first place. Do you think it will benefit it though, in terms of will it have any advantages around saving time, money, efficiencies? You think?
Of course.
What are the benefits to it? I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, you already see some of the benefits today. So, I think to a certain degree, there is a lot of buzzwording around it right now, and then AI will kill all jobs. AI will do everything. Yeah. This is nothing that I foresee for the next few years, right? But what you can already see is that AI significantly accelerates stuff that took weeks before. So 2 recent examples, I think, one is the FDA just did a pilot run of clinical study data review that took them 3 days before to complete. Now is done within a few minutes by a AI agent. And a second example is where you do drug discovery, right? In the past, when you were looking at your molecules, you were do your screening literally with a robot that were screening millions of substances. Nowadays, you can do a lot of that with AI. So you basically can remove a lot of these substances up front, or you can even specifically design your molecule. So it's definitely going to increase the speed, reduce certain items that took literally weeks before. And it will also help to become better. I think we had today in the conference an example of visual inspection, where AI significantly increased the sensitivity of the visual inspection machine, right? So more patient safety. But I do not foresee that it's going to replace tons of jobs very soon, and then replaces the humans.
Yeah, because it's the human element and human
touch
that requires a lot.
And even if you have the large language models, and what they are missing is creativity. I mean, what do large language models do? They utilize the existing knowledge, the existing data, and just rearrange it. So is that creativity? I'm not 100% sure.
No, and is there anything that you're using at the moment in terms of AI and things that you're implementing within Charles River in general, or even new technologies and systems and things to be able to improve the business?
I work with a few colleagues from a company called ATEM. So and they use cryo-EM for fill-grade analysis of viral vectors, which is important for kind of the vaccine industry or for gene therapies, because you use these viruses as kind of a vehicle to get your drug into the human body. And there it's very important that these vectors are fully filled, because empty vectors do not have any kind of effect, and especially these so-called intermediates can cause significant risks to the human body. So it's very important to do these kind of analysis. And there we have a project where we allow, and this would not be possible without AI, right? Where we would allow cryo-EM to perform this analysis to identify full and empty vectors, and also identify the intermediates. Because a human cannot do that, because you have to analyze thousands of pictures, and the differences are really just a shade of gray. And there is an expert who really said, no, without AI this would not be possible.
Which is amazing.
It enables new kind of tools, right? And this is exactly what we just discussed. It's something where the human is not completely replaced. It just accelerates something that otherwise would take weeks.
Which is the point of it, I suppose. You know, I think I've, over the past 6 months, started using it on a daily basis to incorporate to speed admin tasks and things up, which is not on the level of what you're doing in terms of the vials and things. I wanted to dive into a bit around inspections in terms of what auditors look for, common themes that typically get flagged around laboratories, etc. From your perspective. So I think from your side, what is it they're typically looking for, and how do you sort of handle them when they're coming? I know it depends.
What I see more and more also is that auditors look at the underlying scientific rationale or the risk management process, right? When you think about, for example, data integrity, they in the past typically started with the val plan, looked at your requirements, then the report and stuff. And what I see more and more often is that their first question is on the risk management or your risk analysis, right? Or they go in the lab and just look at something, and then they see something and they say, okay, so now show me how you address this, and then you tell them A, B, C, and then say, okay, but why are you doing that? So it's even during the inspections, it's coming more and more down to this looking at the risk management.
I think having that, I suppose, knowledge to defend the strategy around why you've done some things is critical. And I think, educating your employees and staff who are actually engaging with the auditors, how to communicate in the correct way, is a huge thing, especially in the labs.
It is.
Technicians of doing, they're the ones that are at risk of maybe saying something they shouldn't, or giving too much that they end up diving in for.
Especially when you have the FDA auditors who immediately sense like, oh, do they want to hide something, right? Then they can really go extremely deep into the weeds, and when you go extremely deep, you will find something. It might be low risk, but you will find something.
No, for sure. And you've mentioned as well lean principles, and a lot of your job around now is in this topic. So I was keen to dive into that really and see what is happening within the principles you're using at the moment in terms of improvements and anything around there that would be worth sharing.
I think lean principles are also part of risk management, right? Risk management, you don't need to do it if you don't want to be lean and focused, right? So, and I think especially in our new world, you have to be agile, you have to be able to react fast, and if you have kind of very, very, very broad processes, right, that are not lean, where you have to do tons of things before you can change something, before you're able to adapt, it might be too late. I think about a kind of a large oil tanker, right, compared to a small boat. The small boat can just turn around. The large tanker, it might even be too late until it stopped. So I think lean principles are also something that are extremely important nowadays. And I mean, why should you add non-value things to your process?
I think that's what the main topic of why OPEX and lean come up stuck is that senior leaders, maybe heads of manufacturing, etc., they maybe don't see the benefit of it for a while in terms of changing something. I think that's one challenge you get of getting people on board with lean principles from it. Is there any particular challenges that you see that you have to overcome with getting people aligned and bought into?
I think it's even, this is the interesting piece, is it's even less the more senior people, because they know they want to improve processes, they want to they want to be faster, they want to save money, they want to save energy, right? You need to be sustainable in the things. But lean also is something that always touches change, right? And that is one of the major issues. So we have always done it that way is something that you hear very often. And I think it's valid not only for risk management, for changing your processes in terms of validation, but also when you talk about lean principles, operational excellence. Once you touch a process, but we have done it that way for the last 25 years. Yeah, that's right. But that's the reason why we look at it, right? It's simply changing.
Humans are typically scared of change, or they don't like change. I'm quite like that. Anything new, I'm a bit off put by. So what do you do, and how do you get over that objection that you have in a business?
I think very important is to get people on board. So what doesn't work is you develop something in your chamber, right, in your office, you have the process, you rip off the stuff, and then you go to the people and say, okay, this is how we're going to do it in the future. First of all, you're missing the expert opinion. And second is, then the people will definitely be resistant. I think it's very important to very early engage with the people and tell them why you're doing this. It's making their job easier. Of course, you will always have this kind of issues with, and then thereafter you take our jobs away and blah, blah. But I think in most cases, let's say 95% for me, it worked out to really start working with the people, explaining why you think we have to change, right? Explaining what the background is. It might be more time you need initially, but when people understand the context. So my idea or my concept most often is, in the worst case, communicate a little bit too much, talk too much initially, but then people have the full understanding, they have the full picture, they see that you're fully transparent. Right? Even if maybe some of the details got lost, they see you tell them everything, you explain them everything, be available. That works out the best, I think.
I think that the first step, as you said, is understanding why. Like, why do you need to do it? And then it's have you got a process in terms of the follow-up? You know, I think in terms of continually checking that things. I think if you take data integrity or doing a process the correct way in terms of how you input data or not do things, if you try and change things, do you do anything like that?
Yeah, of course. What we have is, you have two things, right? One is when you generally talk about continuous improvement, of course, you're constantly tracking, right? Because it's just part of the cycle. This is from a business perspective, but I mean, it's also in the regulations. The regulations say you have to do an efficiency check. And that efficiency check can easily be reutilized, lean principles, right? So you can reutilize all the data you're getting there to not only do the efficiency check, that you're in compliance, that your new process is working, but at the same time, it gives you valuable data for further improvements. See computer system validation. You do your periodic review. When you do your periodic review and you see in the audit trail, let's take a stupid example. They have regular issues with entering their passwords. And right, constantly are locked out. Maybe that's a good hint to say, I might not only have a problem with data integrity, so why are they constantly locked out, but think about utilizing other means of login, right? Maybe biometric means or something completely different, because they are losing a lot of time when they have to be unlocked and stuff. So this is how you can utilize efficiency checks and regular periodic reviews for compliance, also to identify optimizations from an operational excellence perspective.
Super interesting. I wanted to sort of end in terms of your career in general, in terms of what you've learned, in terms of to give advice maybe to junior engineers and things looking to progress their career or get into the industry and things. So I think, from your perspective, what are some of the things you've focused on in your career in terms of development and, I suppose, being in the same business such a long time, advice you would give to?
I think one important thing is never say no whenever there is a chance, right? Even if it's outside of your comfort zone, you really have to take opportunities when they come up. And it's always important to learn. And don't just do your theoretical studies. Always try to find ways how you can operationalize this. Because that is something that I learned throughout my career. So for me, it was most often the other way around. First, I was confronted with a problem that was way above what I would know in terms of my theoretical background. And so I had to get up to speed with it. So I think that is really important. Don't just go to university for 5 years, do your studies, and then thereafter you go to work. If you really want to progress, then challenge yourself. Always keep up with the current practices. And I think it's a constant learning exercise.
I think it is. I think with regulation changes, new technologies, etc., I think the more you can invest in yourself, and that's in any industry that you have. I mean, the most successful people typically are the ones that do reinvest in themselves. They learn. Even I think what we're doing right now in terms of podcasting. You know, I think it's just such a new way of learning and developing that a lot of people now utilize in terms of doing that. So the last question I have for the podcast is, if you could go back in time at the start of your career, what is one piece of advice you would give yourself?
I think the only thing I really did wrong is that I did not follow my passion to a certain degree, and that it took me a few years to get back to it. So right from the get-go, a lot of my passion was in computer science and in this intersection of processes and using computers and working with fancy technology. But I then started very ground level. I think I was too risk adverse. Right? When I started my career, it already started a little bit with this AI thing, and there was just a new way of doing things. You could study computer science in a completely different way. I was sure to taking that opportunity. I did not. So I think sometimes, especially in your very early career, you have to be a little bit more open to risk.
Yeah.
And it's not a problem when you then have to take a second round.
Yeah, I suppose you have the flexibility to reroute, and if something doesn't work, to be able to do it. But no, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed our conversation, and look forward to having a Belgian beer with you if we can over the next 2 days.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.